Jake had always been the quiet kid. He kept to himself, never fought back, and tried to stay invisible. But to Troy, the school's worst bully, Jake was the perfect target. Every day, Troy shoved him in the hallways, knocked his books out of his hands, and humiliated him in front of laughing classmates. It was just a game to Troy until the day he took it too far. One afternoon, after everyone had gone to lunch, Troy and his friends cornered Jake near the gym lockers. "Let's see how long you last in here," Troy sneered before shoving Jake inside a narrow metal locker and slamming it shut. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed through the empty hallway. They walked away, laughing. Jake screamed and pounded on the metal walls, but no one heard him. Minutes turned into hours. The air grew thin, his breaths came in ragged gasps, and panic set in. His mind raced. Was this how it ended? Would he die here, forgotten? The metal walls felt like they were closing in, squeezing the last bit of hope from his lungs. He tried to stay calm, counting in his head, but fear overpowered logic. He thought of his mother, who would wonder why he never came home. He thought of his father, who always told him to stand up for himself, but how could he, locked away in the dark, reduced to nothing more than an afterthought? Then came the worst moment. His breathing became shallow, his chest tightening painfully as the lack of oxygen took its toll. His fingers trembled against the metal walls, his strength slipping away. His vision blurred, and the darkness inside the locker started to blend with the darkness taking over his mind. He realized he might not make it. He might not wake up if he closed his eyes, and no one was coming. No one cared. A broken sob escaped his lips. It wasn't just the physical pain, it was the utter loneliness, the terrifying realization that even if he vanished right now, the world would move on without him. Is this all I am? A joke? A punching bag? He had never felt so small, so invisible, so disposable. His fingers clawed weakly at the door. He tried one last time to scream, but his voice barely came out, a pathetic, breathless whimper. His body slumped, his forehead pressing against the cold metal, his tears soaking the rusted surface. He whispered one last plea, not even sure who he was begging. "Please, someone, help me." As the school emptied out, darkness swallowed the corridors. It wasn't until the janitor, doing his final rounds, heard a faint, desperate banging that Jake was found. When they pried the locker open, he collapsed, barely conscious, his face streaked with silent tears. His body trembled from the cold, his limbs stiff from hours spent in a twisted position. The janitor, an older man with tired eyes, wrapped his coat around Jake and whispered, "You're all right now, kid. You're all right." The next morning, Jake stood in front of the school nurse's office, clutching the bandages wrapped around his bruised wrists. His hands still shook from the night before, his mind replaying the hours in the locker, the darkness pressing in, the gasping breaths. He heard whispers as he walked through the hall. "Did you hear what happened to Jake? I bet he cried like a baby." Maybe he deserved it. When he entered the principal's office, Troy was already there, arms crossed, eyes filled with forced innocence. The principal cleared his throat. "Jake, Troy says it was just a misunderstanding. A prank gone too far. Do you have anything to say?" Jake opened his mouth, but no words came out. His body ached, his throat felt tight. He glanced at Troy, who smirked just slightly, as if daring him to fight back. The principal's impatient gaze bore into him. Jake realized then no one wanted to hear the truth. They just wanted to sweep it away. "It was just a joke," Troy said again, this time with a mocking sincerity that made Jake's stomach twist. Jake gritted his teeth. "A joke? You locked me in a metal box for hours. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die." The room fell silent. The principal shifted uncomfortably. Troy rolled his eyes. "Come on, it wasn't that bad." Jake clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He wanted to scream, to make them see what had happened, to make them feel the helplessness that had drowned him in that locker. But he knew it wouldn't matter. It never did. The principal sighed. "Troy, I'm giving you detention for the rest of the week. Jake, you're free to go." Detention. That was it. Jake stood up slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. As he left the office, he could hear the hushed conversations in the hallway, the sideways glances. To them, he was still just the quiet kid. The one who wouldn't fight back. The one they could ignore. He walked past the locker where it had happened, staring at the metal door, his reflection warped in its surface. He rested his forehead against the cool metal and whispered, "I see you. Even if no one else does." The incident rocked the school. Teachers whispered in the break room. Students who had once laughed at Jake's expense suddenly found themselves silent in his absence. Some tried to defend Troy, saying it was just a joke, that he hadn't meant for it to go that far. But what was a joke to them had been a nightmare to Jake. The administration expelled Troy, but the damage had already been done. Jake transferred shortly after, leaving behind whispers and guilt-ridden stares. However, before he left, Jake did something unexpected. Standing in the principal's office, his voice shaky but firm, he pointed a trembling finger at Troy. "You all let this happen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but cutting through the silence like a blade. "Every teacher who saw and said nothing. Every student who laughed. Every friend who turned their back. It wasn't just Troy. You were all part of it. And you're only sorry now because you got caught." The room was suffocating. No one spoke. The weight of Jake's words settled in their chests like a stone. Years later, in a sleek corporate office, Troy nervously adjusted his tie, waiting for his job interview. He had spent years outrunning his past, burying his mistakes under layers of self-improvement. He told himself he had changed, that what happened in high school didn't define him. He had worked hard to be a better person, but deep down, he knew some things were never forgotten. When the door opened, his blood ran cold. Sitting behind the desk, looking sharp and composed, was Jake. Troy's throat went dry. He wanted to speak, to explain, to apologize. But the words wouldn't come. Jake leaned forward, studying the man who had once tormented him. He could see it now. Troy was just a man, stripped of the power he once wielded so cruelly. But the memories still lingered, the suffocating darkness, the fear, the hopelessness. 4 years, Troy had been able to walk away, live his life without consequence, while Jake had carried the weight of that day in his bones. A slow smile spread across Jake's face as he said, "Tell me, Troy, why should I give you a second chance?" The room was silent, the weight of the past pressing down on them both. Troy lowered his gaze, suddenly feeling smaller than ever. For the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to be trapped, not by metal walls, but by regret. And just like that, Jake had the power now. But the question remained, what would he do with it?